Wisconsin is going back to work.
I'm Steve Walters.
And I'm J.R. Ross.
This is Rewind, WisconsinEye review of this week in the Capitol. JR, it was Supreme Court day. They decided to go in the recess, but before they did, three major opinions.
Yeah.
Let's walk through them one by one. Act 10, 5-2 upholding that controversial law limiting collective bargaining.
Not a real surprise. You look at the court's makeup, there are solid 4 conservative votes, and then Justice Crooks, who kind of swings from one side to the other. Right. Considering that makeup, they ruled in the past that they hadn't violated the open meetings law and approving Act 10. Wasn't surprised they upheld it. And the other courts looked at it. The federal courts, they also have upheld Act 10. So the message out of folks from both sides of the debate after the rulings was this is pretty much the end of legal debate over Act 10. Now, it won't ever go away in Wisconsin. We'll probably still have debates about it in the governor's race this fall and in years to come, including they expand it to police and fire. But as far as the courts, this may be the last word we hear of the courts on Act 10.
Well, let's take a look at what some of the justices said. Writing for the majority, Justice Gableman said, no matter the limitations or burdens a legislative enactment places on the collective bargaining process, collective bargaining remains a creation of legislative grace and not constitutional obligation. We now uphold Act 10 in its entirety. What he's saying, the legislature gave collective bargaining systems
can take it away.
and can take it away.
Yeah, the First Amendment does not. The First Amendment does not protect a right; it does not create. So when they were arguing that it violated their constitutional protections to free association, they're saying no, that's not in there. You misread the law essentially.
Well, Jared, what did you think of Justice Crooks, who had this anguished dissenting opinion, which included a citation from Pope Leo of 1891? And he said the Wisconsin legislature and governor could have chosen a different way to accomplish the goal of cost savings. The damage to public employee unions was unnecessary. I respect the boundaries of the judicial branch. The judicial branch must observe and recognize that we cannot substitute our judgment on questions of policy for that of the Wisconsin legislature or governor. So he's anguished. Here's my question for you, JR. Is this a concurrence written by a justice who isn't seeking re-election in 16?
This is a justice possibly, and you always read things into them, saying that I'm not going to be an activist judge, quote unquote, and vote to overturn the law because it's legal, but I don't like it. So,
are you surprised Cooks went with the other 4 conservatives?
Not really. I mean, that seemed to be one that he was kind of with them in oral arguments, so not a huge shock. I mean, honestly, with Justice Crooks, almost any case, it's not a shock which way he goes because he seems to be a little different on these kind of cases on those, so it's kind of case-by-case basis with him.
Well, I'm glad you remind us of the encyclical of Pope Leo from 1891. The sharp dissent. Writing for the dissenters, Justice Ann Walsh Bradley, I determine that the majority's failure to address the actual issues presented allows it to substitute analysis resulting in conclusions that countenance the violation rather than the protection of constitutional rights. Because I determine that Act 10 unconstitutionally infringes on protected rights, I respectfully dissent. Here's what I think, JR, and tell me if I'm wrong. This was the opening salvo in her re-election bid. You know, she's up in 9 months in April of next year. Do you agree?
I don't know for sure if she'll run again, number one, and number two, if this is the opening salvo. I mean, it's been a dysfunctional court with her a big part, or somehow entangled in dysfunction, if you will, for a while. So do you want to keep in that working environment? I don't really know for sure. It's still a ways off. But yeah, it's a nice foundation if you want to keep, because I mean, in Wisconsin politics now, if you want certain people to turn out, you need to kind of, if you will, bow down or acknowledge, point at the pro Act 10 crowd if you're kind of from the left of the political spectrum.
Yep. And
you have to kind of genuflect, whatever you want to say, to the anti-Act 10 crowd from the right. So It's kind of where the things fall now.
Well, 2 follow-up questions. Number one, let's talk about the immediate, whether there's going to be immediate fallout for the governor's campaign from this decision. Does this gin up and rally Mary Burke's base? Does this make him froth at the mouth again? Good
question. I mean, Governor Walker went after her right away, saying that, Mary Burke kind of violated taxpayers by approving this Madison teacher contract that, while this case was pending for the Supreme Court. So, I mean, it is a call to the base, if you will, for them as well. But yeah, I mean, the people in the middle, they're not going to change one way or another because of this. It is more about base election, get your folks out. This jazzes up both sides most likely, but the average voter, they're done with Act 10. They want it to go away and move on to things in their lives.
I think Act 10, though, remember that 2011 decision of the court, whether it was passed properly? Let's not lose sight of the precedent that set. That court said then in that ruling, the legislature can make its own public notice rules, its own systems. I mean, I think that's one of the legacies of Act 10. You agree?
Yeah. I mean, well, it kind of acknowledges the separation of the executive, legislative, and judicial powers, right? I mean, you're the legislature. You can do what you want. I mean, as long as you don't violate the Constitution, it's your house, your rules, you know, like my mom used to tell me.
Finally, on the Act 10 issue, Act 10, I mean, the dissent from Justice Ann Walsh Bradley. You and I have heard conservatives talk about they're already casting a net. What names have you heard just considering running against her next spring?
At the very least, Republicans want Judge Gundrum, Mark Gundrum, now in the appeals court in Waukesha, to run. Former state lawmaker, former chair of the Judiciary Committee in the Assembly.
Former circuit court judge before he moved up to Court of Appeals. Excuse me for interrupting.
Oh yeah, so I think they would like him. I asked him about it a while back, and he kind of like didn't give me a direct answer. I'm happy with the job that I have, kind of thing. But I think he's somebody that people would, on the right, like to see run for that seat. He
was one of the first calls, one of the first individuals I thought when Van Hollen said he wouldn't run for Attorney General, but never gave that any consideration.
And don't forget, JB has said, you know, I'm not ruling out anything in the future, so might he come back for a run of some sort?
Yeah, good point. Photo ID, we had two opinions, 5-2 and 4-3, but this court has been big-footed by the federal judges on this, haven't they?
Essentially, you know, it's a great decision if you are a pro-voter ID type person and you want to have that in place. You have now a state court saying, the final state court saying, this is kosher with Wisconsin law. Therefore, if, you know, we don't know for sure, the federal courts, if they ever overturn Edelman in that decision, that means everything's good. You're back in place. You don't have to do anything. You're back where you were in February of 2012 with the one election we had in place for. But it's still a big if. What will the appeals court do in the 7th Circuit? Will the U.S. Supreme Court take it up? So there's still a lot of big ifs out there. But yeah, if you want voter ID, you had to have this decision this week to have it in place in the future.
We'll go back to Charles Franklin poll. This issue polls well, so it's a GOP base issue, isn't it?
It's a base issue. I don't get the impression, talking to folks, it drives the average voter to the polls. They think it seems like they think, the average person, yeah, this makes sense, but they're also not like up at night worrying about voter ID like, you know, certain segments of the population are.
But the look at the sharp dissent from Chief Justice Abramson on this, I think this is a soundbite of the day. Today the court follows not James Madison, for whom Wisconsin's capital city is named, but rather Jim Crow. Wow.
And if you're in the base of the Democratic Party, this is much more of a passionate issue for than it is for the average voter. I mean, again, the average voter, you know, they may think it's a good thing, but they're not inflamed by it. The base, both bases are very much inflamed by this issue.
Third ruling, domestic partnerships, civil unions. Now let's go back. The history here, Governor Doyle, Democrat, got his legislature to approve it, and it took a few years to wind its way through the court. You intrigued it was 7-0?
Interesting. Well, a couple things interesting about that decision. One, it's kind of a moot point right now in a little bit of a way because the federal judge has overturned the gay marriage ban. So that doesn't exist, although it's been stayed. Now, in talking with the attorneys who worked on the case, because remember, Doyle defended the law, or one of the law defended.
Yes.
Van Hollen said, no, I won't do it.
He walked away.
Doyle hired an attorney.
Yes.
Walker fired that attorney.
Yes.
Then Fair Wisconsin, which already intervened in the case, had their attorney basically defend the law. So you had a situation where an outside group was the one saying, yes, this is legal. But anyway,
this is the only time, 7.5 years in office, where J.B. Van Hollen said, I'm not going to defend it on principal reasons. In other words, another reason for the Attorney General to not defend something is a conflict of interest. We understand that.
Yes, but one of the attorneys who worked in this case told me that, look, long as the gay marriage ban is on appeal, they don't have any protection. Same-sex couples don't have any protections right now. This is all they've got. So having this ruling this week in this case is good for them. It gives some protections until the promise of gay marriage, in their words, is fulfilled.
Okay, very intriguing. And let's talk. Let's consider one reaction to the domestic partnership rule. The statute is clearly constitutional, and the Supreme Court of Wisconsin agreed with us. Gay and lesbian couples in Wisconsin no longer have to fear that the protections they have will be taken away by unnecessary anti-gay legal action. That's a reaction of Christopher Clark of Lambda Legal.
And interesting that in the decision, Justice Crooks relied heavily on the statements of the people who pushed the amendment
Yes.
in '06, saying this will not ban civil unions, this will not ban legal protections, it will not take away anything people already have.
Right.
It's all about marriage. Well, then they turned around and said, well, this is marriage, a domestic partner registry. So very interesting how Crooks relied on those past comments to say, look, voters were led to believe this is going to be okay, and this is okay.
Well, real quickly, what do we know at the end of this term about the Supreme Court? Still divided? Anything else?
You really got the court that you've had for the last few years where it's Justices Bradley and Abramson, who are the liberal wing, unabashed.
Yep.
And you've got 4 justices with Justice Rogosak, kind of leader of the conservative wing, and then Crooks, who kind of goes back and forth depending on the issue. So
Yes.
it's the same court we've had for a while. Now the question is, going forward, okay, what does Bradley do? If she wins re-election, same status quo. If she doesn't, and a conservative wins, you're talking about a 5-seat for sure,
Yes.
conservative majority, plus sometimes Crooks. Then Abramson's all by herself.
Yep. Okay, we're done with the Supreme Court. 2 other things I want to touch on, JR. What is your read? Why did Kurt Bauer, president of WMC, issue this statement on outsourcing? I just want to read one sentence. If the goal is to reduce the number of outsourced Wisconsin manufacturing jobs, then lower the cost of production for Wisconsin manufacturers, including taxes, regulations, energy, healthcare, and frivolous lawsuits. Why did he attempt to end the campaign debate on outsourcing with this statement?
Well, WMC has been a big backer of Governor Walker.
Yes.
If you talk to
And they're
Republicans,
drawn into the John Does.
and if you talk to Governor Walker, like even supporters, they will tell you that, Republicans in general, we understand what he's trying to do with Mary Burke, but it doesn't feel right to us because of what we believe in as Republicans. They believe free market principles. They believe in economic freedom. And they also don't like, calling her millionaire Mary Burke. I mean, to me, them, that's kind of, denigrating economic success, which the party's all about. So this may be one avenue of kind of let's move past this because it's a difficult issue for WMC. Their members want Governor Walker to be reelected. They like his policies. They don't like this ad. And Governor Walker's tried to say, look, it's not about Trek. It's about the hypocrisy of Mary Burke. That nuance was lost on most everybody I talked to about that ad. They kind of go, yeah, I see what he's trying to say, but it's not about nuance. It's about Trek.
And just a PS, don't you suppose Trek Bikes is a member of WMC?
I don't know that for sure, but I do know that Trek is not happy about being part of this ad campaign right now.
Okay. Final thing on this segment of Rewind, JR. You surprised that Mary went back to the jobs issue with this her new ad this week?
It is going to be the issue in the end for her.
We're going to hear about this through November 4th?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I thought it was interesting.
Bam, bam,
After the Marquette poll came out, I read one national blog that said that the most damaging thing for Governor Walker, the John Doe, hadn't taken effect. Everybody I've talked to about that said, no, it's not the Doe, it's jobs. This guy promised 250,000 new jobs in his first term, and he's nowhere close. This is the issue. The issue for Governor Walker is how do people feel about their pocketbooks, their kids going to school, their property taxes, their paychecks. How do they feel? They feel better off than they were 4 years ago? He argues, yes. You're in a better shape now than you were when I took office 4 years ago. But Mary Burke will point out, yeah, you're not even close to what you promised us you were going to get us. And why? It's your policies, in her words, that are holding us back.
Right, and the name of that ad is Absolutely, because when Mike O'Shea asked him in 2010, do you want to be held accountable for your 250,000 new private sector jobs, he said, quote, absolutely, close quote. Well, that's fascinating. There is no WisPolitics Rising Mix Falling this week, but that returns next week.
Yes, sir.
And then also next week, JR and I are going to handicap. We will tell you why you should be interested in 10 primary races on the August 12th, primary election, and why those 10 races are worth watching. I'm Steve Walders.
And I'm J.R. Ross.